Kemple of Continuum Philosophical Insight, and today we're going to take 15 minutes to talk about semiotics. Or, well, today maybe we'll go a little longer. If you want to know more about me, who I am, and the work I do, links are below. Today's topic is the fourth and final of a series of related videos that I've done. First, I talked about modernism, postmodernism, and how we got into the mess of today. Second, I talked about the meaning of truth. And third, I talked about the meaning of the word objective. If you've not first listened to those videos, I do recommend it, as they will make it a lot easier to understand what I'm saying in this video. Now, the first time I recorded this presentation, it was unusable. There was a new neighbor's new puppy barking, yipping, and whining that could be heard throughout. And in retrospect, perhaps this was providential, as I now get a chance to do the presentation better. So, semiotics as a formal discipline is relatively new, but also one that introduces unfamiliar concepts and, moreover, concepts at odds with our deep, culturally produced inclinations in thinking. In consequence, many people find it a discipline difficult to understand. This difficulty is due in part to semiotics' own complex history and especially its terminology, but primarily the difficulty is due to our typical and habitual weakness in understanding something new or unfamiliar. It is therefore no big surprise that many people either dismiss semiotics at hand, put it off as perhaps an interesting but nevertheless inessential curiosity, or grasp something of it, but badly and confusedly, and go on to make something incorrect out of that bad and confused grasp. So today, in an effort to make semiotics at least somewhat accessibly intelligible, I want to do three things. First, I want to talk about the general concept of semiotics. Second, I want to talk about what a sign is. And third, I want to talk about why semiotics, as the study of the action of signs, is important not just here and now, but for all the conceivable future. While this might make me sound like some sort of semiotic evangelist, I believe that what I'm advocating in essence is nothing more than a vital, deeper, and more profound understanding of the importance of logic, which, come to think of it, I do have some free literature on that, posted in the notes below. But the first step in my evangelical aspirations is to give a hint of why I think semiotics is important. And very simply, that hint is this. All of our thinking occurs through signs. If we do not therefore understand the nature of signs, we cannot understand the nature of our thinking. But before we jump into that pursuit, let us first clarify something about the name semiotics. For starters, there have been, and still are, a lot of controversies over the name. Who deserves credit for its use today, what precisely it signifies, and even over how it should be spelled. I'm not really concerned with these issues, but rather with another ongoing debate, namely, whether semiotics names a general approach to not just philosophical, but also scientific questions, or if it names a discipline narrower in focus than that. On the one hand, because signs not only permeate all our studies, but also semiosis, or the use of signs, seems to permeate all life, it seems a legitimate idea to introduce a semiotic way of thinking into the practice of many, if not all, our academic disciplines. This makes semiotics something of a method or a movement, a way of thinking rather than the study of something specific. Thus one finds biosemiotics as semiotics applied to biology, or more narrowly zoosemiotics as the study of animal life, semiotic study of animal life, and phytosemiotics as the semiotic study of plant life. Or one can see various cultural and specifically media-focused semiotics. One can envision a psychosemiotics, which I think seems like something badly needed today, and so on. Within this perspective, it has even been proposed that non-living things may be not only understood semiotically, but with reference to their own latent or even nascent semiosic capacities. That's obviously a rather complex and involved debate, not suited to a short presentation like this. On the other hand, semiotics has also been used as a generic synonym for logic, and Charles Peirce, the founder of semiotics, considered this semiotics or logic to comprise three subdivisions, namely a speculative grammar, a formal logic, and a speculative rhetoric, or as he would sometimes call it, methodeutic. Essential to this conception of semiotics was Peirce's designation of it as the normative science of truth. Such a designation should not be taken casually. It is a very big and very bold claim for the discipline of semiotics. At any rate, I will return to this debate in a kind of roundabout way at the end of the video, as I try to illustrate some of the importance of semiotics. But now, let us ask, since we're talking about the study of the action of signs, this seems a pretty important question for that discussion. Let us ask, what is a sign? In other words, what is the essence of being a sign? Well, when I say the word, what do you think of first? Probably you'd think of one of a few common things. A street sign, a store sign, maybe a gesture, some warning, sign language. Or if you are, like many of my listeners, a Catholic, perhaps you think of the sacraments. But each of these, with a very complex exception and consideration of the sacraments that I'm not really sure I'm currently equipped to make, each of these supposed signs is first an object, which secondarily functions as a sign. That is to say, they are what we call instrumental signs, or objects that need to be understood in themselves first, at least in part, in order that we are able to grasp, subsequently, their further significations of other objects. And here I have to mention that if you've not watched the video on the meaning of objective, you're not quite going to grasp what I mean by the use of the word object here. At any rate, this recognition, namely the recognition that the things we have supposed are signs, can only be called signs in a qualified sense, helps us to see more clearly the necessary structure of what a sign truly is. For the instrumental sign shows us that the object signifying is not what we mean by the sign itself. In other words, it's involved in signification, but it lacks something of what we truly mean by the word sign. And perhaps it will help us understand if we think about how John Ponceau defined the sign back in the 17th century, namely as that whose whole being consists in making known something other than itself. Let me repeat that. That whose whole being consists in making known something other than itself. So-called instrumental signs, like the stop sign, the Hollywood sign, and even the flirtatious look, do not always make known something other than themselves, and so cannot essentially be signs. For instance, what does the stop sign signify to the dog? Either nothing at all, or nothing like what it signifies to us. Or what does the girl's flirtatious behavior signify to the oblivious boy? Well, nothing, if he's truly oblivious. Or what does the English word brunch signify to someone whose only language is Chinese? Perhaps that it's a word, but nothing of its object. Or, finally, what does the word dogma signify to an Orthodox and educated Catholic on the one hand, and to an entirely unreligious atheist, with no education concerning the Catholic tradition, on the other? It signifies one object to the Catholic, namely clarified and precise teaching, and another to the atheist, namely the imposition of unexplained authoritarian restriction. That is, for a sign to signify in actuality, there must be three things which constitute a triadic or threefold relation. There is, first, the thing we usually consider the sign, but which is better called the sign vehicle. Peirce also employed at times the term representamen for this sign vehicle, but because that's such an odd-sounding word to our ears, I'll typically use the term sign vehicle in most of the things that I write or speak on. This sign vehicle would be, for instance, the stop sign, the batting of the eyes and chewing of the bottom lip, the word brunch or the word dogma, and so on. Second, there is the object signified. This is, respective to the just mentioned sign vehicles, the law to stop at the sign, romantic interest, the mid-morning to early afternoon meal consisting of breakfast and lunch food, and either clarified teaching or restrictive authoritarian imposition. Note here how one and the same vehicle can signify two different objects. This follows because, third, there must be an interpretant, that is, someone or something capable of being directed by the sign vehicle back towards the object. When we show a stop sign to a dog, unless we have trained it to associate that sign with something, like some behavior and some command, the sign vehicle signifies no object to the dog whatsoever. It's not an interpretant capable of grasping the law that it signifies to us, or at least not in the same abstract, symbolic way. Thus, the nature and disposition of the interpretant may determine what object the vehicle signifies. If you think back to the word dogma and the two different things that seems to signify, I think you get another clear example of that. So armed with this knowledge of the three terms involved, we can now clarify the definition of sign. Since it is of the essence of a sign that it must represent some object to an interpretant, it becomes clear that the actuality of a sign consists in the actuality of a triadic relation. The thing alone, which perhaps signifies, like the girl batting her eyes, may or may not result in an actual triadic relation. The poor boy, in other words, may have no idea what it is she is trying to convey to him. Among the crucial distinctions made by the scholastic thinkers was between instrumental and formal signs, or as we would say now, between instrumental and formal sign vehicles. While all things which must first be understood as objects themselves in order to grasp their signification of further objects are instrumental signs, only cognitive means formed by ourselves and other animals can be called formal sign vehicles, which is to say, sign vehicles that are not grasped first as objects in themselves, but exist as wholly making known something other than themselves. These cognitive means are known by the names of percepts or phantasms at the level of cognition common to all animals, and concepts at the level of distinctively human cognition. Generically, we can name both of these cognitive means as thoughts or cognitive acts, and if we are to understand our cognition, therefore, we must understand the cognitive acts as sign vehicles, resulting in those triadic relations which constitute signs properly speaking, insofar as our thoughts are vehicles, which signify to us as knowers, and thus interpretants, certain objects as known. It is for this reason that our thought is constituted by formal signs, and that only thought is constituted by formal signs, at least, I believe, that Peirce named semiotics the normative science of truth. For truth is, as mentioned in the previous video, something acquired through reflection on the relationship between thought and things, which is to say, that triadic relation established between our percepts and or concepts, ourselves as knowers, and objects as known. But explaining the possibility of the truth of our thoughts is not the only merit of semiotics, for it helps us understand also the development of thought, as not only is the process of seeking truth a recursive process of semiosis, but so are all our cognitive habits, even the false and misleading ones, and so too all the habits which follow from cognition. That is, the cathectic responses of emotion and feeling subsequent to intellection and perception. This perfusion of semiosis in the constitution of our psychological lives is why I think a psychosemiotic seems a pretty necessary development. Moreover, as culture, which exists solely through signs, becomes an increasingly perfused and volatile dimension of our lives, as the once centralized thought of our televisual age is shattered into smaller and smaller fragments in the digital eruption, and those fragments delivered to our pockets and thus our fingertips at all times, an increased semiotic consciousness becomes an increasingly important capacity for understanding both what is occurring outside of and within ourselves. Or, to quote Walker Percy, and thanks to my friend Kirk Kanzelberger for the suggestion, to quote Walker Percy, "It is precisely the value of such a semiotic model that such realities as consciousness, the unconscious, community, loss of community, intersubjectivity, alienation, self, loss of self, authenticity, inauthenticity, and so on, can be articulated as parameters and variables of a single model rather than being assigned haphazardly to a mysterious entity called a psyche. Moreover, this single model is not one discontinuous from the biological constitution nor the cultural influence on the development of what we call the self, nor is it discontinuous from the rest of the cosmos, all of which may be understood through the same semiotic model. In other words, through semiotics, I believe we can understand the essential continuity of the universe, that we can adopt that synechistic perspective mentioned in a previous video. And this is actually a profoundly scholastic way of thinking, as I believe the strongest influence on Peirce's thinking in this matter is Thomas of Erfurt, who proposed that we understand being as consisting in three different modes: a modus essendi, or a being as it exists independently of thinking; a modus intelligendi, or how a being exists in our understanding; and a modus significandi, or a mode of being in and through signification. And while the modes differ, Erfurt argued, the being is in some way or another the same throughout. And I think it is this sort of continuity of being that Peirce's semiotics is trying to get us towards. This is, at the very least, a proposal that I want to make for your consideration. I do hope later on to re-release this video with some visual aids. I've been looking into ways of doing that, as I know the concepts and terminology and relationships between all of these new weird concepts might be difficult to grasp just in hearing alone. I have provided a small glossary below in the notes, which might help as well. Thank you for listening. Any politely delivered comments you may have, subscribing, following me on Twitter, my blog, or I guess just generally caring about what I have to say.